everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences.
Get on with it.
So today, thanks to a review copy from Sinister Fish Games, I'm taking a look at Moon. This is the third in their Stark White series, whatever I'm going to call it. They don't really have a name for the series, but they're essentially games that come in this Stark White box with this type of artwork. First you had Villagers, which was a pretty decent hit. Then you had Streets, which didn't take off as well as Villagers did. Villagers is still regarded as the better of the two. And now we have Moon, which is looking like to be the meteor of the three. So certainly the one mainly for gamers, shall we say. So in terms of the game itself, basically you have a space settlement that you're building, and you draft cards with other players, and with resources that you can gain from production buildings, you will use these resources to play cards into your tableau, which will either produce more resources or give you flags, which are prerequisites for playing certain cards, but also for scoring points at the end of a round. The slight twist here is that amongst these cards you also have an expedition card, which grants a special bonus to you for that turn only. So when you get given a new set of cards, you have a new bonus card that you can use that's like, oh, I could get a bonus resource, or trade 1 for 1, or do some other like weird shenanigan, maybe score a point by doing this aspect. And so you're thinking in that turn, oh, do I want to use it or not? But we'll see, because once you decide, once you've done your turn, there goes the hand, and now you got a new card for you. So play continues through 3 eras in this fashion. You get new cards, the structures that you play get more and more upgraded, but on top of that you've also got these little rover pieces that you can park on other people's cards in order to utilize the production bonuses or the flags that they have. But the rovers go to them in their supply when they're done and count as a tiebreaker for scoring at the end of the round. Aside from that, that's pretty much most of what the game has. You continue for 3 eras and of course total up the most victory points from all your buildings and all your flag scoring and everything, and all the hearts that you've gained from reputation cards, and of course the one with the most.
Of course!
So as you can see, they've kept their usual style of boxes, which I gotta admit, I'm not a big fan of these type of boxes. They don't stack well on shelves, but the biggest problem I have, other than the fact that they do get dented rather easily, is that this is the box lid fully on at this point. This is something that takes a lot of effort though, because you take the lid off and you're left with all the pieces and the cards that look like they're nicely arranged, and the rulebook down the side, because if you put it on top it just won't work. Then you try to get the box lid back on. Oh, that actually worked out well for there, but most of the time you put it on and it catches on the rulebook, or it catches on something else, and you're constantly like, hang on a minute, just that, and it's, you almost want to like take a hammer and chisel the way it sometimes in order to get it in, because it's got a ridged sort of backing there you can see in the box that interferes with a lot of the contents. I would have been happy with just a typical box size, a small box of some description. I just think this whole rectangular thing with a lid is more trouble than it's worth, but as I say, that's a nitpick and a personal thing. It doesn't really detract from the game per se. Because honestly, the component-wise, for the money that you're paying, is pretty solid. You get 3, cool little tuck boxes here with the various pieces in. The rovers are cool, like wooden pieces, screen-printed pieces. So they actually do look like mini little rovers that are cool. You've got the resource tokens are, they're wooden, they're thin, but they're wooden and they're clear, and they've got different denominations on each side. So component-wise, it's very nice. The one component I really hate though is these hearts. I hate these hearts. These are what I use to score victory points that aren't printed on cards, and these are just fiddly as all get out, because you have to place certain numbers on the flag scoring in order to do that at the end of the round, and those numbers are plentiful in the first round, but then the 4s and the 5s are barely in this box other than for those flags. So you pretty much have to take them out in advance and hope no one's actually used them. But even then, you are constantly changing these things up, because you've got 1 on one side, then you've got a 3 on the other side of that, and then you've got the 5s, then you've got 4s that you shouldn't be using, then you've got a 10 flipped to 20, and then you've got 100 flipped to 50. And you're constantly just spending half your game ticking around with these hearts, and I would have been totally satisfied with a point track. If you've got a board in here that just literally shows the hearts for flag scoring and a couple of rules that are easy to remember. I would have done away with this board and simply just had some cards to represent the flag scoring, and then made this a point track that you could have just had a little counter on or something. Just having hearts all over the place does get a little bit fiddly and irritating. Now I know that you need to have some hearts in the game because some of the cards score each round based on how many hearts are on them. Fine. Have a small box of hearts for those, but having hearts for just about every other bit of scoring in the game just gets a little bit annoying.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
These are little component nitpicks. What is the game like to play? The game itself, pretty decent. I mean, if you're in if you like drafting, you're already going to have a pretty good time. And if you're someone like me that likes to do sort of combo building and, you know, thinking, oh, if I play this building, that allows me to produce this, which will let me produce that next time. But I can't play this card yet. Are you likely to build it? Probably not. It'll come back round. Then fine, I'll take a chance. And all of that is in the game and nice and juicy. I also particularly like the expedition cards. Now, some clearly feel a little bit better than others, it must be said. Where are the expedition cards? Here they are. Yeah, you get a decent amount in the box, but other than the first player ones, you do get a decent variety of these to use in Era 1, 2, and 3. But there are some that are just always used, and some that are very situational. I mean, you know, getting a bonus resource in a round, you will use that every single time, but getting rid of a resource for a heart, or getting rid of a rover for a heart, I mean, you'll use that now and again, but you're not going to use that all the time. But they'll go around all the players, and it should be even turn, so it's not, you know, a massive deal. But these are just quite a nice little twist on the whole drafting thing. Just being able to get a cool bonus every hand, rather than just simply every round, and having different ones in each era. It's a nice little twist, and I do like this inclusion. The tricky with the cards, though, is that they've gone out of their way in order to make everything look quite spacey. But sometimes you have white text on fairly light color backgrounds, which makes it tricky to read. The font is not particularly large in a lot of these cases. You know, they explain what the symbols do, but the symbology is a damn sight bigger than the text on the cards. Then the reputation cards particularly suffer from this aspect, where you're trying to read like 9 of these objective cards across the table with very small text on the bottom. It's a little bit problematic, given that this is not exactly a compact game. Yes, it comes in a compact box, but when you get all your settlements out and all the stuff in the middle and the 9 reputation cards and all these tokens, for what you get in the box is a bit of a table hog when all's said and done. And being able to sort of go, oh, hang on a minute, let me just check where those objectives are. Again, there's a few little clunky aspects like that with the hearts and with the small text that does get in the way of the game at times. Now, the rules are pretty straightforward to learn. It's not a difficult one to teach. You know, it's easy to tell what's on the card, although again, you know, small iconography, you know, they make the picture nice and big, but aspects that should be bigger are made quite small, which is kind of like not the way you should go about it. You know, the variety of the different buildings is pretty cool. There's not a huge amount of replay value from that perspective, though, because you will pretty much see every single card in a 3 or 4 player game, and most of them are kind of duplicates of each other or rinse repeat. But you can try different strategies. You can go for the flags only. You can go for the objective cards, the reputation cards. You could decide to just produce a ton of resources and burn them into certain buildings that convert them into points. There's quite a few different strategic choices that you have, and again, that's a cool thing that it opens itself to that kind of play. The player scaling, though, not so good, because really the only interaction you have in this game, if you ignore the fact that you're drafting with other players, the only true interaction is the parking of the rovers and these expedition cards, because if you have more players, more of these are in the game. But I don't want to add that much time length to the game in order just to add more of these in. So really, the rovers are the only aspect that's player interaction. But all it is you simply park a rover on their card and utilize it. You're not taking the decision to play a card thinking whether someone else is going to park a rover on it. It's just a case that you get to look at somebody else's settlement and go, well, I need a water resource right now. Well, you have a space for it, fine, I'll give you a rover. Isn't that lovely? And that's literally it. Other than that, the interaction in this game is very minimal at best, but when you add more players, you really do add more time to this game, and especially at 4 players, it goes too long. You know, you have a certain number of cards for player count. I think you have 8 with 2, 7 with 3 or 4, and 6 with 5. Now, the transition from 2 to 3 is not as huge a deal. You go down a card, yes, you add a player, but 3 players is a pretty good sweet spot for this game, I find. But it's weird why you don't go down the number of cards for 4 players. So you still have 7 cards in your hand, but you've added another player with no other time mitigation, which means that a 4th player added to this game does nothing but add time. It adds no other benefit whatsoever. And with that, it goes on way too long at 4 players. I mean, at 5 players, I wanted to shoot myself or eject myself out of an airlock. It went on far too long. Yes, you only have 6 cards, but 5 players is not a good way to play this game.
5 is right out.
And it's partially because it's not simultaneous drafting. It's turn-based drafting. You take it in turns to do your turn. You basically draft the cards and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, draft again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means there's a lot of downtime between your turn and when it gets back round to you in a 5-player game. And it's worse, bearing in mind that the first expedition card, the one that dictates turn order, shoots around every time you draft the cards, which means that you might have gone, first in one round and then you go last in another. It's that whole snake draft thing, a bit like the problem that Grand Austria Hotel has, where you could have a turn separated by a ton of turns before you get to act again. Same problem can happen here. I just don't recommend this as a 4 or 5 player game. Stick to 2 or 3. Solo, on the other hand, solo is pretty neat. It's a fairly easy system to use. You basically use these cards for a solo deck, which has a weird sort of construct on it that, if you're a South Park fan, kind of looks like the parody Dalek that they used in one of the episodes. Awkward! This looks disturbingly similar to that. I just kept getting that image in my head. But this solo deck is pretty easy. You essentially play with piles of cards on the table and you pick them up in turn order from left to right as your hand to use what you want to do. The AI doesn't produce, you ain't got to worry about that. And pretty much all the AI does is it just reveals a card from its deck, builds it, and applies its hearts and flags and various effects. And you're just trying to get more parts than it at the end of the game. But during each round, it will take out some of the piles of cards, so you have less options as the round goes on. It's pretty straightforward, and honestly, I think it's my favourite way to play this game, because you don't have to worry about the first player card expedition for these. You just have like new expedition cards on the piles. So you don't have the boring expedition card, you don't have the added time length you don't need, but you still get to do all the cool janky city building stuff that's fun in this game. It really doesn't make me not want to play this outside of solo mode, unless maybe I'll play it with 2 or 3, but even then, 2-player back and forth with the same drafting cards, it's fine, but then I'd rather play a quick 2-player drafting game like Tides of Time, Madness, or, Caper that people say is really good. I don't see this being the 2-player game of choice, so really I'm playing this at solo and 3 players, which is a weird, mix of player scaling that I want. So Moon overall is a pretty decent game, to be honest. I mean, I think it's my favourite of the 3. Villagers, Streets, and Moon included. Streets didn't really work well with me. I didn't like the whole FOMO mechanic where the Meeples went to various places. That was kind of weird. And Villagers was good up to a point, and then the replay value kind of went down. This one, though, still has that replay value issue, but I think that the game itself is just more interesting to play with the drafting plus the city building aspect, with the janky little combos and different strategies you can do. But also I like the expedition cards as an inclusion, and I think the solo mode is incorporated quite well here. You can tweak the difficulty to your heart's content in terms of, I don't think I can't remember if there's difficulty modes in the book, but, you could do what you like to tweak the difficulty with this, but I felt it was a decent enough challenge, and it allows me to do all the fun aspects of the game without the added downtime and time length, which this game really suffers from, particularly at 4 or 5 players. I don't recommend this for large groups. I mean, putting 5 on the box is usually a recipe for disaster anyway, but here I actually don't think I would play with 4 unless I house rule that you go down to 6 cards. You've got to have 8 cards at 2, 7 at 3, 6 at 4. Maybe even consider knocking a card off those. 7 at 2, 6 at 3, and 5 at 4. Consider that. Yeah, your scores might be lower on BGG, but who cares? At least the game will finish within the time, because you're supposed to be able to get this done in, what, like 45 to, what does it say on the backs here? I don't know if it says the time length on this game, which is kind of weird, but, you're supposed to be getting this done in about 45 minutes to an hour. Good luck trying to do that at the best of times. It does take a while to get through 3 eras, but the game itself, pretty solid. So overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I recommend it, and I do think it's good. I think the player scaling issues and the downtime do hold it back quite a bit. I really do find these hearts quite fiddly. I think that a better system should have been done for this, but the rest of the components I really like. I can get over the fact that it comes in a box I'm not a fan of. That's had no bearing on the rating at all. That's just personal preference. Same with this board. But I think a solid solo mode and some good fun gameplay makes up for a lot of those shortcomings, but still keeps it out of the region of being great. but I still think this is good, and I think it is probably my favourite of the three. I still stand by that comment. So that's it from me on this episode. If you like what you see, then please remember to thumb it up on YouTube, but also thumb it up on Board Game Geek when you see it posted on there. Of course, check out the rest of the content on my channel, including the videos I have done on the podcast to preview and review the UK Games Expo, where Moon was, I believe, being demoed at the time. Thanks to Sinister Fish for providing me with a review copy of this game. And of course, remember, as always, regardless of whether you want to share the Moon with a weird makeshift bootleg Dalek or not, it's still only a game. Bye for now, everyone.